Egypt's opposition parties are crying foul. They claim Sunday's election was rigged, but for the first time, women will make up at least 12% of parliament thanks to a new quota system. Can female voices answer the widespread calls for real democratic change in Egypt? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Hazem Seeker. Welcome to Inside Story. President Hosni Mubarak and his ruling National Democratic Party look set to celebrate as they approach 30 years in power in Egypt. Results from Sunday's elections are coming through, and the main opposition bloc says it's lost every single one of its 88 seats in the first round. And there are reports that turnout is as low as 10%, partly due to voters being blocked from polling stations. And there were claims of widespread irregularities, as Ayman Mohyeddin reports from Cairo.
When these Egyptian voters heard that ballots were being stuffed with fraudulent votes, they stormed the polling station, threw the ballot boxes outside, and set them on fire. This footage allegedly shows several people filling out fake ballots. Al Jazeera could not independently verify the authenticity of these pictures. In Mahalla, over 1,000 opposition supporters, mainly from the Muslim Brotherhood, gathered at the main stadium where Sunday's votes were being tallied late into the evening. But as the count dragged on and tensions mounted, violence broke out as police tried to break up those on hand to witness the vote counting. It capped a day of violence that Egyptian civil society and Human Rights Watch blamed on the government.
The point I'd like to make is the violence we saw was very much a controlled violence. The authorities seemed to be in charge of what happened and when.
Egypt's High Elections Commission acknowledged some irregularities and violence, but said despite canceling Sunday's vote at a few polling stations, the elections were a success, and the results will undoubtedly stand once announced. One outcome most already know is that the Muslim Brotherhood, which is banned as a political party in Egypt but fields candidates as independents, will not have the same presence it did in the past parliament, where it had 88 seats. Dr. Mohammed Al-Baltagi, a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood who managed to secure enough votes to force a runoff, says the real challenge will be what the Muslim Brotherhood and by extension Egypt's opposition can now do.
When it comes to the future, I'm sure that the people of Egypt will further agree and support the idea of change, especially when it comes to ending the emergency laws and preparing the way for a fair election that can be monitored by the whole world.
No one in Egypt doubts who will win the majority of the seats. The question is, though, what does it mean for the future of the country and civil society, which have had to endure the rule of the National Democratic Party for the past 30 years and will have to do so for at least another 5. Ayman Mohyeddin for Inside Story, Cairo.
Well, one thing that is new about this election is that at least 12% of parliament will be made up of women, the most ever. Roughly half of Egypt's 85 million people are eligible to vote. They must be at least 30 years old with Egyptian nationality. And this is what they're voting for: an expanded parliament of 518 seats, up from 454. That's mainly due to those 64 women-only seats, thanks to a law enacted last year. However, it's a real possibility that they'll all be from the ruling party. Only 508 seats are voted on. The remaining 10 are appointed by the president. Those normally include a high percentage of women and Coptic Christians to make up for their low representation among elected members. Well, joining us now to discuss this are our guests in Cairo, Nawal Saadawi, an Egyptian novelist, writer and commentator. From the ruling National Democratic Party, Professor Maged Reda Botros, member of the Policies Committee. And in London, Mona El-Kouedi, a political analyst specialising in Middle East politics at King's College. Well, welcome to all of you. Dr. Saadawi, if I could start with you. Is this a step in the right direction, or is this, as some have said, just another way for the ruling Democratic Party to maintain their grip on the country?
Yes, it is the game of democracy. It's a game played by different groups: the government, the opposition, the Muslim Brothers, women and men. It is a game which has nothing to do with real democracy or equality or real representation of the majority of people in Egypt.
But having said that, do you believe that change can come from within the system? I mean, do you believe that the women that will be that will make up the new Egyptian parliament, can any of them affect change from within?
No, maybe change backward, because it's not a matter of change, and it's not also a matter of number of women in the seats, because it's not enough to be a woman, to be really fighting for justice, freedom, equality between countries, between sex, gender, class, etc. It's not enough to be a woman. There are women who are much more oppressive and dictators than men. So I'm not deceived by this game or quota of women. We have to look deeper into this election.
Well, let's put that then to our man from the NDP then, Dr. Botros. Most of the women who are going to win these seats, as we have said, it's almost a certainty that they will all be from the NDP. So why would NDP members, just by virtue of being female, have a fundamentally different political approach?
I believe that the people, the popular votes, will determine whether they are affiliated to the NDP or not. I mean, we are not the people who determine. I mean, it's the popular vote would determine.
Well, there are some. Sorry to interrupt, but there are a lot of people who would say you are very much the people who would determine this by virtue of all of the stories that we've heard, by the control that the NDP party has had in the political life of Egypt for decades now, and by all the stories that we've heard of things like voter intimidation, reports of ballot stuffing, government people handing out cash and food to voters in many of these places that we'll be getting reports from. So you surely are in very much a position to effect these changes, aren't you?
Well, let's admit something. There were irregularities. There were violence in certain limited areas. I mean, this was expected. You are talking about more than 5,000 polling stations throughout the country of more than 83 million people. So irregularities happen, violence is expected, but if this violence does not undermine the integrity of the elections and electoral process, then I believe that there is no problem with this. Irregularities happen everywhere.
But if there are why are there irregularities to begin with then? I mean, isn't it because people are so frustrated with the system?
This is an indicator that there is a democracy. There is a free voting, free will, free expression. I mean, when I allow people from different political streams to express their opinion, or sometimes because of the heat of the election process, they go violent. This is expected all the time. I mean, this is an indicator in itself, is an indicator of democracy.
All right, let's bring in Mona El-Kouedi in London. I know you have some comments about this. Do you feel that this is, as Dr. Botros says, just democracy in action?
Well, I think, the answer to that would be to look at what happened before the elections and on the elections day, just not to isolate things. So if you look before the elections of how the electoral process had been handled, you will find, or you can sort of expect it to be a non-democratic sort of elections. Before the elections, we've experienced a sudden close down of many liberal talk shows and on Egyptian news, on Egyptian television. We've also experienced a close down of many journals, independent voices, of course. At the same time, there had been many of the independent candidates, particularly of the Muslim Brothers and others, had been, stopped from running for elections, and regardless of judicial rules, they still couldn't run. So that's before the elections. If you go to the election day itself, there have been, as you've mentioned correctly, there have been many irregularities, and yes, we agree that it happens everywhere, but the way it happened and the way it actually it was formulated and the way that it's gonna actually sound back on the Egyptian system is very dull. Looking at the or what your guest from the NDP had just said, that it's totally led to the people and the people can decide. I think it had been very clear that the people going to vote have been very minimum, and it's not clear the legitimacy of the upcoming parliament, how it's going to look like and how people are going to deal with it. Just quickly on your question regarding women quota, I mean, you can't really assess something by totally isolating it from the environment that it was actually, it started in. Looking at the quota, I mean, from a distance, it might like a very interesting development to the political system in Egypt. But you're talking about a political system, like as if you're talking about malfunctioning political system and having within it some reform processes. So the question is, whatever these reforms, whatever they look like, however they go further, they won't lead to any change, because the system itself is tailored in a way that will never shake or jeopardize a particular status quo that the ruling party is trying to put
forward. All right, I want to put that point
forward.
back to Dr. Saad Dawi then. If the system is broken, as you said earlier, if there is, if this whole thing is a game on the part of the ruling party and the opposition, as you said earlier, then what kind of specific changes do you think women can bring to political life and society in Egypt if it's not through this current political system?
As I told you, it is not a problem of women can make change. Number one, I would like not to isolate Egypt from the whole world. I just came from the States and I witnessed Obama election. You know, the problem is in a capitalist, racist, neocolonial system, who dominates the elections? Power and money and the media. Money, power, and the media. This is global. So we should not separate the global from the local. So Egypt is not just a unique phenomena in such so-called free elections. I haven't seen free elections anywhere because the system itself allows these false elections. The system allows this play, this game. That's number one. Number two, it's not a matter of quota of women, because we have Thatcher. There are women like Thatcher, so it's not a matter of gender. Of course, we need women to be there, but not to be there physically, to be there by their brain. The brain should be different. The brain of women should not be capitalist, patriarchal, racist, neocolonial. Because if the brain of women is exactly like the brain of men, we make no change. The point is, how can we change the system? Because if we change the system, the so-called free elections will change. So I don't want really to just speak about the details. The whole system, the whole free elections need to be discussed and challenged.
Then can that change come about from outside then? Can international pressure change the system?
No. I disagree totally with foreign interference or external power. And I was very much against people coming from outside to observe. There was no observation. In fact, even the local observation was not there, except according to the power system. The party, the government party, decided who will observe even locally. So the point is power. The party of the government dominate the media and everything, and the police and everything. And who will observe, and who will be elected, who will be appointed, what women, what type of women to enter in the parliament. So we have to discuss this very, very essential points. But to go and to discuss just, of course, I think that the whole game of democracy need to be challenged and exposed
Dr. Botros, if putting 64 women on the parliament is that really gonna make a difference? I mean, because the critics are saying that all you're really doing here is co-opting women, and it's just another way of trying to maintain your grip of power. And if the parliament is simply there to just rubber stamp whatever the government does, then what difference will a few more women on the parliament make?
Well, let me clarify a point here. Theoretically, we don't assume that there are only 64 ladies are in the parliament. We assume that there will be a minimum of 64 because this is the quota, the women's quota. Besides the women's quota, we have in 222 districts, electoral districts, women can be nominated. We have 440 other seats to be nominated besides the 64. That's one thing. The other part of the question, can they make a difference? Yes, I believe I go with Dr. Saadawi. She has a very deep, insightful opinion about elections, and she has a view of the representation of women. Now, women are half of the society. They see things differently. They see issues in a different way. That's why the people of Egypt pressured the government to have a minimum representation for women, and that's what happened.
All right, let's talk specifics
election.
then. What kind of issues specifically in Egypt do you think women see differently perhaps from men, or what kind of change can they bring about in the system?
As a matter of fact, look at the recent democratic reforms in Egypt in the last 4 or 5 years. You have many legislations to give more rights to women. We had the Supreme Council for Family. So now it's the quota for women is not the first initiative or reform, legislative reform happens to women or women's rights. So it is a complementary step towards a complete picture. When you look at this way, the system, the political system in Egypt is providing women with more rights, giving it its full rights. So we expect that with this systematic approach, with the Supreme Council of Family, that's women and family, the other reforms and the quota, now women can address different issues that men usually might forget or might overcome or might neglect. So those issues, I mean, there are a variety concerning women, concerning their rights, wages, lots of issues. I mean, I can talk a lot about those issues.
Let me just bring Mona El-Kouedi back into this discussion. I saw you looking at that, some of what you heard rather skeptically. Your reaction to that?
Yes, well, the first reaction to saying that, you know, maybe women has got a different view from what's happening, I might be from those who argue that half of the Egyptian population has got different view from what the NDP thinks. That doesn't mean bringing everyone represented in the parliament. But if I may just go back to the whole quota issue, I find myself very skeptical on making the discussion on quota, the right of women, getting them in the system, because it sort of distracts our attention from the major malfunctions and problems with the system. The discussion goes mainly from the part of the NDP, as if, you know, we are making changes and you should be a bit patient and see how things change. But actually, if you look to the whole system itself in terms of human rights violations, then half of the Egyptian population is under poverty line, all these issues are not addressed. So sort of making the whole question of democracy and parliamentary elections to be mainly on whether these new seats and quota numbers would bring change to the Egyptian life is very, I think it's very much the wrong question. If I may also just reflect to your question earlier to Dr. Saadawi on the external factor, I find myself, of course, agreeing with her. And just to make the point clear, I think we now have a closer view of what's happening behind the scene thanks to WikiLeaks. And if you look to the cables coming from most of the Middle Eastern embassies, you'll be surprised to know that, well, democracy is certainly not at all one of the issues discussed in the secret and confidential documents. It's particularly when it comes to Egypt, it's the Palestinian-Israeli issue, it's Iran, and at some lesser importance, it's Iraq. So sort of looking at the US and the external factor and trying to assess why it should get in it's really the wrong way looking at things.
Well, you say that pressure from outside is not the way to go. But if we go back to 2005, to the last elections, we had a different U.S. administration in place, the Bush administration, and they were applying more pressure on Cairo to institute these kind of changes. And for the most part, I mean, again, there were irregularities, but it did seem to have some effect. This time around, we've seen much less pressure from the US, and as a result of that, we've had much more, a lot more violations of the opposition. All these stories that we've been getting about the Muslim Brotherhood and the stories that they've been coming out with about the crackdown and so on. So, do you not think that international pressure could have some sort of an effect?
Well, I totally agree with you in terms of the 2005 elections. Of course, a mere comparison between the two elections, you'd find that we were better off with 2005 elections. However, if you look at the 2005 elections and the sort of, as you said, sort of more democratic measure taking place, and we've got 88 members of the Muslim Brotherhood, it was more of, it tells you more of the intentions of the American administration, or how the external pressure is actually being tailored based on, of course, which is very understandable, American interests in the region. So it was more of in 2005, and it was said by Condoleezza Rice, that it seems that we've been supporting stability at the expense of democracy, and we thought that we made it wrong. And that's correctly started to put more pressure on democratization in thinking that this would bring, that would cut down all terrorism and jihadist thinking and Islamist rise to power. But with 2005 elections and with the sort of co-optation of the Muslim Brothers in the system, the American administration, which correctly, I mean, how the Egyptian government tried to show that you're not actually better off with these.
That is going to have to be.
What you have to do is.
Sorry to interrupt, but that is unfortunately we are out of time. That's going to have to be the last word. But I want to thank all of our guests for taking part: Dr. Nawal Saadawi and Dr. Maged Rida Botros, and in London, Mona El-Kouedi. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, welcome your comments and suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.